It has often been said that Mark's gospel is really a sprint to the cross. We've been working our way to the cross in every single passage, every single verse of his gospel. I've mentioned this before, but all four gospels are laid out differently. John revolves around Jesus' 3 visits to Jerusalem, Luke around the parables of Jesus, Matthew around the teaching of Jesus. Mark does not go chronologically. Mark doesn't go thematically. Mark goes geographically. It moves from north to south, from the top of Israel all the way down to the cross. Because of that, each section of Mark, each chapter of Mark, each verse of Mark, each word of Mark is marching us to Golgotha. Jesus has prophesied it over and over again. He said it directly. He said that's where he's going. He's said it indirectly. He's hinted about it. He said everything from I will be lifted up to die to I will be handed over to the Gentiles and they will crucify me. He's described it in detail, perhaps none of the prophecy more staggering than what you see in Mark 10:34. There Jesus says, "Behold, we're going up to Jerusalem. The Son of Man will be delivered to the chief priests and the scribes. They'll condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles. They will mock him, spit on him, scourge him, kill him, and 3 days later he will rise again." And we read that and it seems so clear what he's describing because we've seen the end products. But understand, for the disciples at that moment, they don't have a grid for that. There's no way that Jesus could be crucified. There's no way he could be handed over and spit on by the Roman kings and governors. They don't have a grid for that. And yet once you arrive in Jerusalem and see him being rejected by Israel, finally condemned to death by the Romans, we've seen Mark 10:34 fulfilled. Agonizing word by agonizing word. Prophecy by horrible prophecy has come to pass exactly as Jesus said it would. Last week we looked at his trial in front of the Pilate, and you can use trial in the loosest sense of the word possible. Jesus, of course, had 6 trials, 3 before the Jews, the high priest, then all of the Sanhedrin, and then finally the Sanhedrin reconvening in the morning. He had 3 trials before the Gentiles, Pilate, then Herod, and then back to Pilate again. And all of it was a horrible miscarriage of justice. Last week we looked at some of the verses that are repeated here in Mark 15:16 through 21. Much of that was already described in John 19, which we looked at last week. But last week when we looked at it from Pilate's perspective. We saw Pilate's staggering and stammering and ultimately his impotence as a leader. Remember, Pilate said, "Don't you know I have the power to acquit you or condemn you," when the reality was Pilate had no such power. He tried fruitlessly all morning long to acquit Jesus and was ultimately unable to do so, finally washes his hands and hands him over to be dealt with. This morning we'll look at a section of that again that repeats some of the details we read about last week, but Pilate by now has faded into the background. From Mark's perspective, we're done with Pilate. We're done with, in many sense, looking at the Sanhedrin. We're done with the crowd. And really what happens in this passage this morning, Mark 15:16 through 32, what happens in this passage this morning is that the person of Jesus Christ rises to the surface. Through all the abuse, all the trials, the horrible injustice, the mockery that was the legal system back then, used only as a thin veneer, as an excuse to murder him, all that is pushed into the background, and what comes to the foreground, what should be at the forefront of our minds this morning, is the person of Jesus Christ. This passage really is just a description of Jesus Christ. And we're going to work our way through it and see how he's described mostly from the lips of others. Before we look at this passage, understand that all of human history has been working towards the events we're about to read about. Everything before the cross was working towards the cross. Everything after the cross looks backwards and is in light of the cross. In many senses, the cross is the lever upon which all of the world moves. It's the center point of human history. It stands in the timeline of human existence at the focal point. Everything else moves around it. It is the lever upon which the world moves. It goes all the way back to the beginning of human history with Adam, when the Lord told Adam, from you, Son of Man, will crush Satan, but that seed will first be struck by Satan. And we see that in this passage this morning, that prophecy became a promise to Abraham, that one of his descendants will be the one that brings peace between God and man, that Abraham's nation will produce this Messiah. If you've wondered, why is the Old Testament here? Why is Israel in the Old Testament? Why did God choose Israel? Of all the nations in the world, why Israel? And if you go back before Babel, there weren't even nations in the world. Why did God change the world to make nations? And then why did God choose one nation to work with? The answer is simple: to bring about the cross, so that there would be a nation that could produce Jesus, and so there could be a nation that would kill him when he came. That promise to Abraham becomes a covenant, a specific covenant with David. It will be one of his descendants. God didn't just choose Israel, he gave them a good king, David, and a promise to that king that somebody from him, a descendant of David, from the line of David, from the tribe of Judah, one of his descendants will be that king. He'll be the one killed by Israel. God gave Israel a good king in David and then a lot of bad kings, so that they would be able to recognize a good king and kill him when they found him. And that's what happens in this passage this morning. As the person of Jesus Christ steps out of the pages of Scripture, steps out of the shadows of history and into the center of all of human existence here, understand this is the reality of Jesus finally revealed. For so long he's taught in parables. For so long he's been assisted by reluctant disciples who are hard-headed and dull-hearted. But now Jesus finally gets to shine as he is. The curtain is pulled back and Jesus is seen in his glory, his authority, his power, his majesty. This is him on display here. Understand as we read this that the time of teaching is past. There's no more teaching for Israel here. There's no more last words from their prophet from the steps of their temple. That's over. There's no final miracle for them to see. That's done. There's not one more parable for the crowd. There's not one more warning. There's not one more sign. There's no more anything for them. It's done. It's not about them anymore. It's all about Jesus Christ. And now is the time for him to be seen as he truly is. First, we're going to see that he's ordained as royalty. He becomes ordained as royalty. Look at verse 16. The soldiers took him away into the palace. That is the Praetorium. The Praetorium, historians tell us, was one of the most magnificent buildings in the ancient Near in the Greco-Roman world. It was one of the most magnificent buildings in all of Israel. It was right next to the temple, but the Romans didn't live in the temple. This was the most majestic building for Romans and all of Israel. There were over 100 bedrooms in this. This is the kind of place with marble floors and columns. This is where kings or governors would stay when they went to Jerusalem. It's possible that Pilate himself was even staying here. He also stayed at Antonio's fortress, but here the whole show moves into the Praetorium, this majestic place with the courtyard. A cohort of soldiers is there, we see in verse 16, which would have been 600 soldiers. Through Jesus' life, he hasn't been in a place like this. Foxes have dens and birds have nests, Jesus says, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. But now, finally, he's in a palace. Now, finally, he has a place fit for a king. He has but a few hours to live, and now royalty is allowed into the palace where it belongs. No more Mary and Martha waiting on him with basins. No more crowded rooms with people coming through holes in the ceiling. No, now Jesus has a palace fit for a king. He's ushered in there. And then the whole Roman cohort comes, likely 600 soldiers put at Jesus' disposal. They're all here to serve this king. They're all here to do his bidding and bring about his will. The bumbling disciples, they're gone. Peter's not trying to break in. Judas is nowhere to be seen. Thomas is doubting somewhere else. The 12 are gone. They've been replaced. Now Jesus has a palace fit for a king and soldiers fit to serve the king. The first thing they do, verse 17, they dressed him up in purple, a regal color, a color that only nobility would wear. A noble man might wear purple. A leader of a cohort might wear purple. Perhaps this was his robe. No common person would ever wear this. No common soldier would even wear it. He'd have to have risen through the ranks before he would be allowed to wear purple. If you go to a Buddhist country today, you'll see there's a certain red color that only a certain level of monk wears. And whenever you see anybody in that red, that's that kind of monk. That's what purple was in this Roman world. By wearing purple, you identify yourself as nobility, as royalty, as a powerful person. If you're in the military, you're one that needs to be reckoned with. You oversee dozens, if not hundreds of people if you wear purple. And Jesus finally gets his purple robe. He has a palace fit for a king. He has soldiers there to serve the king. He has the robe that identifies him as royalty now. And they twist a crown of thorns and put it on him. This is the kind of crown that the kings would wear. Athletes, if they win their competition, might wear this kind of crown, minus the thorns, I'm sure. We have these kind of vines that even grow in Virginia. They curl themselves around trees. They have these thorns that pierce into the bark, and they have these green, leafy laurels, you would call them. That's what they called them. And these things spin around on them. And if you cut them, you can bind them together and put them in a perfect circle on a head. This is what a king would wear. A champion athlete might wear this. Earlier, Jesus asked the Pharisees for a coin, and one of the Pharisees held it up, and Jesus said, "Whose image is on it?" And they said, "It's Caesar's." How did you know it was Caesar? Did it look like Caesar? These people had never seen Caesar before. Because he had the crown on his head, the crown of laurels. This is what a king would wear, and now one is placed on Jesus' head. They put it on him, and then they begin to acclaim him. They shouted, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Now he has these soldiers. He's dressed like a king in a palace for a king with the crown of a king, the soldiers of a king bowing down before him, taking a knee in front of him and shouting, "Hail, King of the Jews!" This is Jesus' moment. Finally, they've identified him. Finally, his glory and his royalty is revealed to the world. Verse 19, they kept beating his head with a reed. Luke lets us know the reed, Luke 23, it's the form of a scepter. This is what a king would have. It was likely given to Jesus as a scepter to go with the part. Now you've got the king with his robe and his soldiers and his crown and his palace. He even has the scepter to reign like a king. They begin spitting on him in verse 19 and kneeling and bowing before him. I mean, imagine this scene. Here he is dressed in his purple robe with the crown and the scepter, the marble floors. And the soldiers rotate through, spitting on him, then kneeling down before him, saying, "You are the king. You are the king." Paying him homage. Jesus is ordained as royalty. Verse 21, they pressed into service a passerby coming from the country, Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to bear his cross. And they brought him to the place of Golgotha, which is translated place of a skull. They tried to give him wine mixed with myrrh. He didn't take it. Not only was he ordained as royalty, secondly, we see that he's served by his subjects. He's served by his subjects. He's on his way now to Golgotha. It's a walk from the Praetorium to Golgotha. And as he's making his way there, he's weary, he's faint, and he's on a timetable here. There's a schedule to keep. There's a schedule from the Romans' perspective. They want this dealt with. These soldiers don't want to be doing this all day long. I mean, he may be a king, but they have places to go. There's a schedule from the Jews' perspective. He can't be on his cross during Passover. And there's a schedule from God's perspective. God needs him to die by 3 p.m. because that's the hour the Passover lambs are slain. This has to get going. Jesus has not slept. There's no record of him eating. He's beaten. He's been scourged. He's bloodied. When they took off his purple gown and put his old clothes back on him, it likely ripped open all of his wounds again. He's slow getting to Golgotha. But listen, kings don't have to carry their own cross. Royalty doesn't haul their own burdens around. And so the soldiers, realizing that this has to go faster, press into service Simon. That Greek phrase, press into service, it's unusual in the New Testament. It's all over the classic Greek language. It's a word that has one meaning. In the Roman world, soldiers had absolute authority over every individual. A soldier could tell you to do anything. There was no concept of warrants. There's no Bill of Rights. If a Roman soldier told you to do something, then you had to obey. That word to describe that is pressed into service. That's how it's translated here. These soldiers need something to happen. They need this to go quicker. And so they look around and they find Simon. He's a passerby, it says. He's not a disciple of Jesus. He's not following Jesus. Passerby in the Greek language, it's like coincidental. He just happened to be there. He's on his way to Jerusalem from Cyrene. People from all over the Roman world, Jews from all over the Roman world would descend upon Jerusalem for Passover week. He's one of these people. He's likely a big man. They wouldn't have chosen a wimpy or a feeble guy to haul the cross. That would defeat the point. So identify this big man. The Roman world didn't have our concept of ethnicity. We divide people up by skin color. That defines their ethnicity somehow. The Roman world didn't have that concept. It was very, what we would call racially diverse. But the Jewish population spread throughout the Roman Empire did have racial segregation in that sense. In other words, the Jews from Libya all had black skin. The Jews up in Asia had lighter skin. And so you could tell where somebody in the Roman Empire was from if they were Jewish because of their skin color. So he stands out with black skin as being from Cyrene, modern day Libya. He's recognizable. Why in the world is that noted for us? Because this encounter with his king changed this man's life. He wasn't a believer at the beginning of the day. He wasn't looking for Jesus. He was just walking. But he got a chance to serve the king, and that changes everything. He got a chance to see Jesus and meet Jesus, and he was never the same. We know from the book of Acts that he went back. He went back to Cyrene preaching the gospel, and people from Cyrene spread from there and brought the gospel to even Lystra. When Paul got there, he met believers who'd heard the gospel from Cyrene. Simon's own children, he became a Christian husband, a Christian father. His own children became missionaries and went to Rome. And you see them referenced in Acts. Rufus referenced in Romans 16. It's strange to me that Simon got the gospel to Lystra before Paul. Simon got the gospel to Rome before Paul. Throughout Paul's ministry, he's beaten in different places by the gospel because of this man here. That's why it's mentioned here. Mark, likely writing to Greek believers in Rome, would have known this man's children. Anyway, Simon gets a chance to serve his king. He's not the only one serving his king. In verse 22, they brought him to Golgotha, translated as skull, because they killed people there. Verse 23, they tried to give him wine mixed with myrrh. Why wine mixed with myrrh? Because it had a dulling effect or a deadening effect. This is old school anesthesia here. It would deaden the pain. It would have a stupefying effect, historians tell us. It could knock you out. It could numb you. If you go to the dentist, you get this injected in your face so you don't feel the pain. Well, Jesus is being crucified, so they give him this wine to stupefy him, to slow his mind down, to slow his reactions, down to numb the pain. They're not doing this so much to serve him. They're not doing it for his benefit. They're doing it for the guards' benefit. Guards would give this to somebody before they crucified him so that they didn't fight back. Jesus rejects it. He's not going to fight back. He doesn't need the wine to keep him from fighting back. Matthew lets you know that he tasted it before rejecting it. It's likely he didn't know what was being given to him. It gets in his mouth. He realizes what they're trying to do. He spits it out. Mark just says he didn't take it. He didn't take it. He wanted his senses about him. He wanted to think properly. Proverbs 31 says if somebody is suffering, give them strong drink. But the verse before that says it's not fit for kings to drink strong wine, because then they'll forget what they said. They'll forget what justice is. Jesus here is a king, and he rejects the wine. He will not be tampered with. He will have all of his thoughts, all of his nerves, all of his feelings will be fully on. And he rejects the wine. Regardless, his subjects are trying to serve him. Then in verse 24, then they crucified him. That's what you get. It's one word. No descriptions of it. Just they did it. And they divided up his garments among themselves, casting lots for them to decide what each man should take. This is the soldiers being the antecedent, the they. Historians tell us they would do this to people they are crucifying to demonstrate that they're already a dead person, that they don't mean anything. They don't have anything. They don't mean anything. They have no rights over their clothes. They don't even have any clothes anymore. They'd be crucified naked, of course. No loincloths like the Renaissance art. They strip off his last clothes from him, divide him up by lots. Some people say this was common. They do this to everybody who's crucified. I wonder if there isn't something more going on here with this, because, by this point, Jesus' clothes would have been devastated, soaked in blood and spit. I can't imagine them having any value whatsoever. It reminds me of when President Lincoln was dying at his deathbed. Once he had died, people around him were fighting over his clothes and cutting off his hair secretly, and knowing that it would have some value. Maybe something like that is happening here. After all, he's a king. We don't know. It just says that he was completely debased. In verse 25, it was the third hour when they crucified him. Again, just that one word. We're so mesmerized by the depictions of it. It's strange that Mark doesn't let you know anything about the physical dimensions of this. People were crucified in different ways. It was a cross because there were two beams, but sometimes people had their hands tied above their head, and the nail went above their hands to keep them stationary above their head. The beam across is what they would sit on, so the cross beam would go through their legs, so they'd be contorted like this with the beam through their legs and their feet, then on the bottom side of the cross nailed in, and they would be sitting there. Sometimes they would put a little piece of wood under the feet, and they would stretch out their arms, and the arms would be stretched out, and they would be crucified that way, and he'd be standing on the beam. The Romans crucified tens of thousands of people. They did this in all kinds of different ways. There wasn't a uniform crucifixion code. Who knows how Jesus was crucified? Who knows where his arms were? We know that his arms were pierced. We know that his feet were pierced. Beyond that, we don't get any details of this. It just happens. Verse 26, the inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." Not only was he ordained as royalty and served by his subjects, but thirdly, he's proclaimed as king. He's proclaimed as king. The sign says it all. This is the King of the Jews. John 19:20 tells us it was written in 3 languages, Greek, Latin, and Aramaic. Aramaic is, we would call it Hebrew. That's what the Jews spoke there. Latin and Greek were the 2 languages of the Roman Empire. He was designated as king by everybody, universally. His exchange with Pilate, remember Pilate asked him if he was a king, and he said, yes, but not like you mean. He's not simply the king of the Jews. He's not a rival king to Caesar. He's not a king of the Jews or a king of the Gentiles. He's a king of all those who know truth. It's a universal reign. Now the sign says as much. A universal king with a universal reign deserves a universal sign. Anyone can read it. There's no excuse now. He is proclaimed as their king. Do you remember in the book of Esther when they asked Haman what would be the greatest honor the emperor could bestow on someone? And his answer was to be paraded around the streets and everybody being told who this man is. That's the honor that befalls Jesus here. Paraded through the streets of Jerusalem with a sign designating that this is the King of the Jews. He is a man with authority. He is a man on a mission. And the sign says it all. He'd been describing himself as a king. The prophecies had pointed to him as a king. People had wondered if he was a king. That was the big debate. Now all ambiguity is gone. The world will know that he is their king. Verse 27, they crucified 2 robbers with him, one on his right, one on his left. Why is that detail noted? Who cares? Verse 28 lets you know the scripture was fulfilled, which says he was numbered with the transgressors. Another way of saying this, he was humbled with his subjects. He was humbled with his subjects. He was not a far-off king. He was not a distant king. He was not the kind of king that lived in his ivory tower in his palace and didn't know what life was like on the other side of the moat. He understood his subjects. He understood his people. He knew what it was like to lead the common life. He was not an elevated king who was disconnected from his people. He was one of his people. You see the opposite of this concept even in American politics. You see a senator who's lived in D.C. for decades will go back home to his Midwestern state, get off his Cessna, flip a few pancakes in front of a camera, and get back on the plane. I know these people. I flip pancakes with them, and nobody buys it. Photo op at Denny's? No way. This is not a photo op for Jesus here. These are his people. These thieves, they are his people. They are his subject. That's what kind of king he is. He's numbered with these people. This is so astonishing that the only explanation for Mark is that it fulfills prophecy. How could somebody with this royalty, this power, this potency, this authority, how could he go out with 2 thieves? How could somebody who's sinless end his life with these 2? How could somebody with that kind of honor and that kind of dignity allow his life to end like this? Because Jesus is not the kind of king that left heaven to have fellowship with Caesar. He didn't leave heaven to have fellowship with Herod. He met Herod once in his life and didn't even say a word to him. He didn't leave heaven to come to the Pilates of the world. He didn't leave heaven to come to the Pharisees of the world, or the Sadducees, or the religious leaders, or the lawyers and the scribes, or the politicians, or the movers and shakers. That's not who he had fellowship with. Listen, he didn't just come for the normal, hardworking Jewish people of his day. Those were not his people either. He was the king of the worst, the lowest of the low, the vilest of the vile. Those are his people. That's what kind of king he is. He didn't just come to his people, he became one of them, to the point of being numbered with the transgressors, crucified with the thieves. Well, not only was he humbled with his subjects, he was honored as a judge. He was honored as a judge. Verse 29, those passing by were hurling abuse at him, wagging their heads, a very complicated Greek word. It means almost literally wagging your tongue or clicking your tongue at someone, saying, "Ha, you who are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." What's that line from? Well, Jesus said it 3 years ago. It's not even recorded in Mark's gospel. It's in the Gospel of John. 3 years before this, Jesus came to Jerusalem for the first time, and he went into the temple, and he cleared it out, and he told everybody, this is an apostate religion. This is a false religion with false leaders, and God is going to destroy it. Jesus appointed himself as the judge of the Jewish religion, and he condemned it and said it was all going down to demonstrate that the temple would be torn down. 3 days later, he would build it back up again. They had been smarting from that rebuke for 3 years. Now he's on the cross, and they remind him of it. It's like Lot's friends in Sodom. You're our judge? You said you were our judge, Lot. That's what they're telling Jesus here. You came to us as our judge. You told us our religion was bankrupt. You rejected it. You said it was going to be destroyed. Now look at you. Which one of us is on the cross? That's what they mean by that. It's the judge who's condemned. But notice all that Jesus said. He said the temple would be destroyed. He repeated it again in the Gospel of Mark on his third visit to Jerusalem, just a few days before his crucifixion. Remember, his last words in the temple was that because this religion steals from the widows, he watched the widow put in her mite, because this religion steals from the widows, steals from the poor, that God is going to judge it and destroy it. The leaders of that religion are thieves, the followers of that religion are blind, and the whole thing is going to be judged by God. It will come apart brick by brick, Jesus said. And then what? He replaces it. That religion is gone and replaced with the person of Jesus Christ. I'm trying to think of some kind of an American analogy for this. In California, a few years ago, a federal judge stepped in and took control of the state prison system. All the thousands of employees, all the administration of the prison system, all the different levels of bureaucracy from bottom to top, the whole thing set aside and replaced with one man. This judge would be responsible for finances and right and wrong, and all of it would go to him. The whole bureaucracy set aside, he's in charge now. That's, I think, an appropriate analogy for what Jesus is doing here. The whole religion of Israel set aside. The temple set aside. The sacrifices set aside. The priests set aside. The temple veil set aside. The feast days set aside. And what's it replaced with? It's replaced with Jesus. He is their judge. And they remind him of that as he's on the cross. Verse 31, in the same way the chief priests also, along with the scribes, were mocking him among themselves and saying, he saved others, he can't save himself. Let this Christ, the King of Israel, now come down from the cross so that we may see and believe. They've confused cause and effect. They think signs will produce faith. It's always the opposite. Faith leads to signs, not the other way around. But notice what's buried in this verse 32. He is the Christ. He is the Messiah. Christ is just a transliteration of the Greek word. It would be translated Messiah. That's what they say. He is the Messiah. This is the Messiah. It's the high priests that are saying it. The chief priests are declaring it that he's the Messiah. The scribes are endorsing it. This is the Messiah. He is the Savior of the world. Notice the power of Jesus' kingship. Even his most harsh critics, the opposition party, so to speak, is now here gathered around the cross, looking up at him and declaring that he is indeed the Messiah. He's the Savior of the world. Mark adds, those who were crucified with him were also insulting him, similarly insulting him, I assume, declaring that he is the Messiah. Well, all of this, when you take it together, this is the result, that Jesus was mocked to death. He was mocked to death. They ordained him as royalty. They served him as their subjects. They proclaimed him as their king. Jesus was humbled with his subjects. He was honored as a judge. He was declared to be their Savior. And all of it was done to mock him. It was one mockery from start to finish. The most common word in this is mock. In verse 29, it's the Greek word is blasphizmo. Those passing by were hurling abuse at him. That's the Greek word blasphizmo. We get that from the English word blasphemy comes from that. It's bringing reproach against God. And don't miss the irony. That's exactly what they sentenced Jesus to death for. Remember, at his trial, they finally found him guilty of something, and what stuck was blasphemy. And now they're doing it to him. He was blaspheming because he said he was God, and now they're blaspheming him because he is God. The irony has come full circle. They ridiculed him, they rejected his idea of sin, and they rejected his idea of forgiveness. They mocked his idea of deity, and they mocked his impression of humanity. They mocked the content of his teaching, they mocked the gospel that he taught. They mocked him in every conceivable way. Beating him, spitting on him, tying him naked to a tree, hurling abuse at him. This is the derision of what it means to be a Christian. This is our King. Pilate was exactly right when he said, "Behold, this is their King." Do you see our King here? This is what it means to be a Christian, is to follow this man. Do you understand that when Paul said, "I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ," he wasn't being bombastic. He wasn't giving a halftime speech like a coach trying to fire up the troops. Do you understand that there is something serious to be ashamed about as a Christian? That this is our King. This is the one whom we love. This is the one whom we follow. Exposed and ridiculed and mocked. Some of the earliest archaeology of a cross is actually graffiti in Rome of a man with a donkey head on a cross. And the inscription says, "A Christian worships his God." This is our King revealed. It's exactly like he said it would be. Every detail fulfilled. This is our King. And this is more than our King. This is the substance of our faith right here. Through 2,000 years, people grasped for some kind of symbol for Christianity, the Jesus fish or the dove a lot of churches use, or an open Bible or a throne. But the only real universal symbol for Christianity is the cross. This is what it's about right here. And of course, this is the news that makes us ashamed. This is the news that we see our own sin in this. I mean, do you understand that were you there, you would have been one of the hurling of insults. Not only the were you there argument, but beyond that, it's your sin that made him go through this. This is a sin that you deserve. The veil that's pulled back here is the veil of your own heart. What you actually see here is Jesus exposed as how your heart used to hold him. He was numbered with the transgressors, not simply those two thieves, but you and me. This is our lot. These are our people. These kind of transgressors, these kind of blasphemers, these kind of men who torture another. This is us. And this is our King extending us forgiveness. We know that the message was received. Luke tells us that one of those two thieves who was hurling abuse at Jesus, he himself came to faith in Christ that day. Perhaps hearing the crowd identify him as the Messiah, ironically enough, is what it took for him to confess faith in Jesus Christ. Simon went away a changed man. The centurion who oversaw the execution, we're going to see later on in Mark that he comes to faith. One after another. What of you? What do you see when you look in this passage? Don't be surprised when people treat you as a Christian with contempt. Don't be filled with self-righteous anger. How dare people mock Christians? Don't they know our contribution to culture? On and on and on. This is what they did to our King. What makes you think they would do anything different to us unless we compromise his message? The student is not above his teacher. As we go this week, I encourage you to read this passage, meditate on this passage, sift through this passage, and be humbled by it, see your own sin in it, and be shocked about the evil that we're capable of in our heart.